I feel like we were living like teenagers for a long, our income was decent. So we had the house, but we were just spending money. No real plan, no real, we never sat down and said, what are we going to do when we're in our 60s? What is our retirement going to look like? Or how are we going to fund these college for the kids? I mean, it would come up and it would be uncomfortable. So we just wouldn't talk about it, sort of just, push it to the back and we'll deal with it later. Dave Ramsey's course, besides the accountability, it really helped us get a lot of other things in order. We went and did life insurance. We went and did a will. And we really started to try to plan what our next was going to be once we were done working.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Okay, welcome back. Episode 184 of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. Jace, what's going on?
Not a whole lot, man. What's going on with you?
Well, we got some good news today because for the last week or so, our new website has been up and running. So check it out, millionairesunveiled.com. And just to walk through a little bit here on what's available, because there's some new stuff. So the podcast, if you go to the podcast tab at the top and click on an episode, there's a Q&A, or not really a Q&A, but a comment section at the bottom of each episode. So sometimes we'll get people writing in with questions that they want to ask the millionaires or a follow-up to a question that we asked during the show. So we've taken that interaction now right to the millionaire. So we'll let each of our millionaires know that these comments and questions will be coming through this platform. And some of them will respond, I'm sure, and some of them may not. But just a heads up that comment section is there. So again, just click on podcast off the main page, click on the episode, and at the bottom of that episode, there'll be a comment section, and the millionaire can choose to reply to those. If you ask a question or have a comment about the specific episode, we'll let our previous millionaires know, but just know that this is probably something that will be enhanced or a little bit more productive going forward on the new episodes that we do launch. Also, there's a tab called Ask a Millionaire. So if there's a question you have, you can send in a question just either written via email or via a recording. So a voice recording, you can record your question. And if you do that and it's a good question, we'll just play it right into the podcast and just include that for the millionaire. Then they can answer it right back. And maybe we'll play it on a couple of the episodes so that you can kind of get a different perspective. So that's a neat feature there. Under the resources tab, featured podcasts is any interviews that we've been on. So occasionally we get asked for those, or lessons learned. So those featured podcasts are podcasts that we've been on where that's what we've talked about. Recommendations are the top recommendations that our millionaires have had. Right now we just have books up there, but there'll be more to add. And then there's also a tab for investing with us in multifamily and commercial opportunities. And also if you'd like to be on the show, and then a media kit for potential advertisers. So glad to have that up after some time. And I think that we're really excited about the engagement, right, Jace, between millionaires and some of the listeners on any of the questions that maybe we didn't ask or stuff that they wanted to follow up on.
Yeah, totally. I'm super excited. I mean, obviously, we've been at this for a long time. I know we talked about it. It's been a couple of years that we started getting this in the works, and then we kept changing what we wanted and features and transcript or that, and, went back and forth for a long time. And obviously, with COVID, some things got delayed and whatnot. So super happy to finally have it up. I think it'll be really good for our listeners and engagement and, millionaires, and definitely really bringing some of these conversations, together for people to have with each other, and then really bringing some more awareness and, learning from each other. So I'm super excited about it. It's been a really long time coming for sure. So super happy to have it up and launched, and hope you all like it.
Yeah. Now everybody can see how good looking Jace is too, because his picture's right on the front of the landing page. So there you go.
Yeah, it's a good thing I took it a few years ago before I had a couple kids, right? I'm just kidding.
After you put on 50 pounds?
Nah, man. I'm not doing that. I wish I could bulk up a little bit, but.
All right. Quick recap from last week. We had Rachel Cruz on the show. We talked about what it was like growing up with Dave Ramsey. Obviously, Rachel's been successful herself. She came out with a new book, So we talk about that, and also some money personality. So fun interview with Rachel Cruz. This week's episode, we have Ron. Ron works in IT. He's targeting retirement, about 60 years old, has a current net worth of about $1.3 million. Just under $1 million of that is in investments, primarily retirement accounts. 800,000 is in his 401k, so 800,000 of the 1.3. He also has $300,000 in home equity. We talk about some mistakes and lessons learned. One of the things he mentioned is not doing a Roth earlier. So a good discussion on that point, and one we should probably have more on the show. So good interview with Ron this week, fun interview with Rachel Cruz last week. If you'd like to be on the show, send us an email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com, or you can just go to our website under resources, and there's a tab you can fill out there that will be right to our inbox. If you're interested in investing in multifamily opportunities, send us an email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. Same email address. If you have a deal that you'd like to share and we end up buying it, we'll send you a finder's fee. So always looking for good deals. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. We appreciate everybody who's left a solid review. If you do enjoy the show, we just ask that you help spread it around, and it helps us grow the show and reach new millionaire interviewees. So thanks for tuning in. And without any further ado, let's get into today's conversation with Ron.
Ron, you want to just give us a little about your background and what you're up to now?
I'm a father of two 16-year-old twins. My wife works for a health nonprofit here in Atlanta. We actually reside in Marietta, Georgia, a suburb north of Atlanta. I am on a sort of retired hiatus, waiting on employment to open back up with COVID. I had a job offer that went away. I spent about 20 years at Verizon and took a package to get out of there. Investment wise, everything else. I mean, we've been targeting retirement somewhere around 60, 62 years old. I don't know if this year is going to be a bump in the road in that or not. We have had to slow down investing a little.
So, and what is your net worth today?
About 1.35 million.
Awesome. Congrats on being a millionaire. And how is that broken up?
About 962K or so is investment accounts, some retirement, or some 401K, some 403B, and then an IRA. We've got a home with a net worth of about 450,000. Still owe a bit on it, around 100, 130, I think. And then, just some cash reserves. And that's pretty much it. We don't have a lot of real estate investment or anything else. I'm not including, we do have, my wife's mother passed away last year. We do have her house that was left with, she owes nothing on it. It's probably worth about 150K. We don't include that in our net worth calculation.
How come you don't include that in there? Is that something that you've taken possession of, or it's got to get split with the family, or?
Well, right now her brother is still living in the house.
Oh, okay.
And because we are not really sure what's going to happen with that or what we're going to do with it.
Yeah, makes sense.
We just,
My we're in a similar situation too with my grandfather that had passed away, and my dad and his brother and siblings and whatnot. Same kind of deal. So I get that. Can you break out how much of that 960-ish is in retirement versus non-retirement or tax protected accounts?
I would say probably about 800-ish is in tax protected, 401k, 403b, or IRA. The rest is just some general investing accounts.
Okay. And none of the 800 is in Roth at all? It's all pre-tax?
No, we didn't do any Roth.
Okay.
Regretfully.
How come you regret that?
I think it would have been, when I took a lump sum and we rolled that over into an IRA, and I think I did we kind of did the calculation. I think it would be nice to have that stuff growing, pay the tax up front, and have that stuff growing and not have to worry about paying the taxes down the road. I felt like we were in a position, with our age and where we are in our path, I think we just decided, because we have so much and otherwise, pre-tax savings, that we would just stick that path and not do the taxes. And then we thought we'd see what was going to happen this year. And then with COVID and with job change and everything else, we sort of just decided to hold the line for now.
Interesting. No, it's an interesting conversation, because I think a lot of our guests and just people in finance in general have the debate of whether they're doing pre-tax or post-tax. And everybody's like, well, is your tax rate going to be higher in retirement? Are you going to live on more or not? And it's just always it's so hard to predict, but it's interesting to hear from somebody who hasn't put any into a Roth that you regret some of that decision.
Well, I think like you're saying, the tax thing, that was part of the reason we looked at it. We thought, by the time we're touching this money, what is our tax rate really going to be?
Yeah.
I don't know what our income tax rate will be, other than, whatever we're taking on investments will probably be it. And if we're looking at a $50,000 a year, draw or whatever it might be. Yeah, we weren't
you're
sure
set up
really
great
totally.
In that rate. It's hard to project. And I mean, for me personally, I've always just said, you know what, I just want to have options down the road, because who knows what the tax rate's going to be. When I know what the tax rate is today, I don't know what it might be 20, 30 years from now. And so, but at any rate, for the majority of people, it's, for the most part, it's probably, especially if you didn't really start in your 20s, if you kind of got started in your 30s, you're probably better off doing a traditional in most scenarios. So, and doing that pre-tax. But anyway, so, before we started recording here, you mentioned that you have some set aside for your twins for education. How much is in those accounts again?
Right around 160-ish, 158, 160, something like that.
Oh, wow.
And that was rolled over. That was part of a lump sum pension I took, rolled that into an IRA. We didn't start a 529 years ago. We didn't really have our house in order when the kids came along. And so when we looked at some stuff, we thought, well, we can tap, we set up the IRA knowing we can take out education related expenses from that without penalty. And so that was sort of the decision, was to put that into an IRA and, kind of invest it somewhat conservatively. I mean, there's a bit of bond and a bit of stock in there to let it grow a little bit for the next couple of years. But we know we can, take that money out without penalty, just pay the taxes on it then. And that's how we sort of decided to use that instead of trying to set up a 529 when we're only a year and a half, 2 years away from college.
Interesting. So you just basically have that earmarked for education.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
I mean, it is set up as an IRA through Fidelity, but that's what it is. That's what we plan to use it for.
Interesting. And is that something that you've shared with your twins, or is that just you have that in your head and that's what it's going to do?
No, we've shared it. We're pretty open with the kids, about where the finances are, and about what I think it's important for them to be realistic about what they're looking for college. It's fun to say, hey, I'm going to go to some liberal arts college out of state and pay, $70,000 a year. But you want to give them a dose of reality that, if that's your choice, you're going to have to fund a lot of it. That's kind of the decision we made. And we talked to them when we included them in these conversations. And I think they're pretty on board with it.
I see. So the money that you've got invested in retirement accounts, is that primarily in mutual funds, stocks, bonds, index funds? What's the makeup there?
It's broken out. A lot of the 401k stuff, I was able to sort of pick and choose through Fidelity. That's who carried a lot of this stuff. My wife has a 403b through TIAA-CREF, so their options weren't quite as good as far as fees and tax sheltering, some of that stuff. So Fidelity, it's kind of broken out. A big chunk of that right now is in FSKAX, which is sort of like 500 bond or whatever, or 500 group, where it's about 313k or so in there. It's sort of a VTSAX, or if you're in Vanguard or something. So it's a similar thing. I've got about 75k in a bond fund, another 70k in another bond fund that was related to telecommunications or Verizon, and then there's a few other funds, and emerging markets fund or a international fund, sort of that kind of breakout, but pretty heavy in just a big index fund with low fee, low cost.
Yeah. Has the allocation changed over time much?
A little bit. And I don't know if we'll talk about this a little later, but, how I manage that, we hooked up with a Roboadvisor 2-3 years ago. And it's sort of almost one of those targeted date funds where you say, I want to retire at X. And then they basically log onto your account and they can run all of the calculations and see, return versus fees, cost, that sort of stuff. And so, when I get the report from them, annually or a couple times a year, I can see that they're moving a little bit more into a bond. And then with the volatility, the market obviously is going crazy again after a big drop earlier this year. So I don't think that's impacted it as much as just sort of staying the line and working towards a date where obviously you'll shift to being a little more conservative, a little more bond, a little less risk.
Let's go into it. I think it's interesting. Have you used a financial advisor besides that at all?
We started using Personal Capital to track net worth and to track a few other things. And then they had a pretty good savings plan that they set up last year. So I took a bit of a lump sum cash payment out, put it into savings to use as just, sort of my income, while I was waiting to see what was next. So when you get over, I don't know, 500, 750,000, something like that, Personal Capital offered a financial advisor to us at no fee to do a review And then obviously they asked, hey, we can manage everything for you. I don't remember what the fees were. But we did take advantage of their review. So I did have a couple of meetings with one of their advisors. He was able to get very granular as far as how things were broken out in our accounts, things he thought might need to change, reallocate, things like that. So other than that, no, we were kind of relying on just some seat of the pants stuff initially. And then as we got into using these robo-advisors and doing a little more studying, we felt pretty comfortable with where we were.
Yeah. And how long, you mentioned you're using Personal Capital. How long have you been tracking your net worth?
Oh, maybe a little less than 2 years, maybe. I mean, we would be aware of what our... last couple of years. I mean, we knew where we wanted to get. We went through the whole Dave Ramsey thing and tried to really get on top of things, on top of debt, that sort of stuff. A little later than we certainly should have, probably into our 40s before we really tried to get a grip on things. And I'm not a person that likes to log in there every day. I think I met you guys through a Facebook page where I had just posted my net worth. I saw some other people were posting, and honestly, I think it was the first time I had looked in, I don't know, probably not quite a year, but I would say 6 or 8 months, and just saw that, we tipped over 1.2 million or whatever it was at the time. So I don't really track it or look at it. It would drive me crazy, so you go in one day and you'd see it would drop 30 grand or, gain 30 grand. And it was like, I'm not the kind of person that wants to look at that and get stressed about it. So it's just sort of set it and forget it, let it bubble.
So speaking of Personal Capital and tracking net worth, you budget?
We do budget. My wife is the queen of that. She is the spreadsheet queen. So she has a couple of things that she set up. And then we do a lot of budgeting through an app called YNAB. You need a budget.
Yeah, I have a good friend who loves that.
Yeah, that she loves it. I mean, being that's sort of her realm. That's what she does for a living. And so, so she sort of manages that. So she logs into Personal Capital, and it does do some breakout. I think she got a little nuts or frustrated by looking at a lot of the breakout they had as far as how they categorize expense, things like that didn't match up to Personal or to YNAB. And so trying to cross those T's and stuff, I think it drove her a little crazy. So we don't really use it for budgeting. It gives you a general sense. If you use Personal Capital, you can see that, you spend $100 on dinner and it might be categorized as home improvement, or, it's not completely accurate. It does seem like they're getting more accurate, but there are some areas where
that's what's tough about all those, right? Mint included.
Sure. Yeah.
You go to Walmart and it's hard. I mean, how does it know what you bought at Walmart? Right?
My Saturday mornings with coffee, the wife is like, "What is this? What is $84 at Home Depot? Is this?" So how that gets categorized, and it really depends on how granular you want to get with that.
Yeah. Exactly. So just reviewing your allocation here, you have about just north of 300 in your home equity, your primary home. Any other real estate investments?
No.
Okay. So now we talked about your allocation. Let's go back to your story a little bit. How did it all start? You mentioned Dave Ramsey. You did the Dave Ramsey thing. Did you have a lot of debt? Was it student loans, cars? What's your story?
Yeah. So, we got married, mid 90s. We're both, early 50. We got married mid 90s and just, I was a musician for a number of years. I took on a job through a temp agency to get a W-2 so we could eventually buy a house. So in 1994, I took the job. 1996, we bought our first house. That house almost doubled in value in just a short number of years. We sold it and moved out. That was more in town. We moved out to the suburbs just north of Atlanta, put a chunk down on the house we're currently in, and we're set here. Like a lot of people, we would trickle some money into retirement accounts, into the 401k. Really didn't think that much about it. You're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you're not really spending, at least for us, we weren't spending a lot of time thinking about that. We would run up debt and we'd take a chunk and pay it off, or we would borrow against our 401k or take money out stupidly, just mistakes you made. Certainly before the internet and some of these, financial independence and Facebook groups and other places that really did a lot to hold you accountable. Because of all that debt and because of just going through that cycle, we'd run up 25 grand worth of something on a credit card, and then we'd have to struggle to pay it off or just not pay attention. And, it sort of hit home at one point. The kids had come along. We really tried to really look forward and say, how do we how do we make a plan? How do we move forward with this? We went to a Dave Ramsey thing. And I think more than anything for us, the accountability, sitting around a table in a church with these people asking every week, well, what did you do this week? Where are your credit cards this week? And doing the whole, cut the credit cards up. We actually cut our credit cards up. We put them in a Christmas ornament, one of those little glass Christmas ornaments. So we have it kind of sitting there just to remind us, and
you still do.
Yeah, I'm looking at it sitting above my desk. We hang it on the tree every year, and then I have it sitting over my desk. But it's just a reminder, we don't need the debt. If we can live on cash, that's what we do. So that was a big change. And then the other thing from Dave Ramsey, it really felt like we were, after we went through that course, we felt a little more like grown-ups, right? I mean, I feel like we were living like teenagers for a long, our income was decent. So we had the house, but we were just spending money, no real plan, no real, we never sat down and said, what are we going to do when we're in our 60s? What is our retirement going to look like? Or how are we going to fund these college for the kids? I mean, it would come up and it would be uncomfortable. So we just wouldn't talk about it, sort of just, push it to the back and we'll deal with it later. Dave Ramsey's course, besides the accountability, it really helped us get a lot of other things in order. We went and did life insurance. We went and did a will, and we really started to try to plan what our next was going to be once we were done working. So we were able to scribble a date, an age, I should say, as far as when we wanted to stop working. Personally, I don't love working. I mean, I worked in IT for a long time. It was a lot of long hours, a lot of stress, stuff like that. My wife, on the other hand, she loves what she does. She works for a health nonprofit. She really feels like she's doing something for people, which is kind of what I'm now seeking out. But the idea was maybe I would retire a little earlier. She might keep working if she liked what she was doing, but we would have the option to both just, pull the plug. We initially said 62. We tried to move that to 60. It's really going to depend on what the next year or two looks like.
And how old were you, Ron, when I guess I'll just use the word transformation, but when you did this Dave Ramsey program, how old were you?
I want to say probably 40, or, it's probably 10 years ago. So around 40, maybe a little better.
And that's really when the investing started, or did you put money into like your work 401k before that?
Yeah, I was putting a little bit into 401k. I would, once they had a website set up where you could go in and change it, it was like, oh, we need a little more cash next month. And I'd put a little less in. But, after Dave Ramsey, it was like, at the very least, you got to get that match. Verizon, the company I worked for, had a good match. So I took advantage of that. The wife did the same. When one would pull back on a match or whatever, we'd kind of go a little heavier on the other income. But that's when we were really started to pay attention to let that stuff grow. Obviously, if we had started doing it in our 30s, we might be looking at a retirement at 55 or something like that. Unfortunately, we started a little later, but I feel like we're pretty well on track now.
Yeah, I mean, it's still amazing, right? Even if you think a little bit later start, you're almost at 1.5 million. You'll get over 2 here with how much you have in the market easily, and significantly more than that, probably, right?
We hope. Yeah.
How long have you lived in your same home?
We moved here in 2001.
Wow, so almost 20 years, 19 years.
Yeah. We moved here to start the family. Kids are 16, so we moved up here to get a bigger house. Found the best. Basically, we're in the best school system in Georgia, which obviously you pay a little more for. But we believed in public school, so we moved here. Yeah, and that's part of the retirement. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say. I mean, I think part of our what's next plan is once the kids get done with school here in a couple of years, the plan was to sell the house we're in, downsize a bit. And some of that money, obviously we'll purchase something else or decide if we want to purchase or rent, or really depending on where we want to be. If we want to get a townhouse or an in-town condo, and it'll depend on where the kids are at school. But that's part of the plan too, is to use some of the equity we have in the house to bridge until we start drawing out of retirement as well.
So about $500,000 house, 130 left-ish, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Did you get a 15 or a 30-year mortgage when you bought the house?
We initially got a 30. We refied. I think we actually refied it like a 12-year at one point. Honestly, I don't have that in front. Sorry, but yeah, I think it was like a 12-year. We had worked with a mortgage company. It was fantastic. We really loved them. Rate was great, and so they kind of bounced around. You can do 10, you can do 15, and then she goes, "Well, what if we do a 12?" And we're like, "Well, sure, okay." So that's kind of what we did. And, we initially thought we'd really accelerate paying that off, but the interest rate is so low that we decided not to, we were basically 2.9 something, or no, I'm sorry. So it's closer to like 2.63, I think.
Wow. Really low.
Yeah. So it didn't, we just thought, well, we'll just keep putting the money in the market the best we can instead of paying this off. I mean, I'm the kind of person, I think I would feel better if the house was paid off. I think that's a big kind of brain thing for me to know that that's done. But at this time, we're just letting it ride. The payment's manageable and the interest rate's so low. It just seems to make sense to just let that go.
How did you know when to refinance it?
Well, we had a home equity loan, a lot of mistakes that people usually make, probably a little younger than we did, but we'd borrowed against the house, pay off, sort of consolidate stuff, to do a couple of little improvements. And we were approached, I don't know, cold called maybe, by a mortgage company who said, hey, we can look at some options. We can get your rate down. So we did that. I think we rolled, we just basically refied into maybe even another 30. And then pretty quickly they called us again and said, if you go down to a 15 or a 10, we can get you down under 3. And so that was sort of, well, why don't we do that? And so, they helped us with the calculations to figure out what the closing costs and the fees and everything else would be. And we were able to sort of extrapolate that out into what is it really worth doing, to save this much a month or to save this much in interest? And it made it worth doing for us.
Sure. So just the rate reduction. You mentioned your wife works. Has she worked your entire marriage outside the home?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So as you look back now, I mean, you're a few years out from retirement? 5 years? 10 years?
Yeah, maybe 10. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, as you look back and now you're a millionaire, 1.35, maybe a little bit more, right? If you count this other house you mentioned. Did you think you were going to get there? Did you have a goal to get to 1.5? Do you have a financial goal going forward?
Well, I think as we found some of the financial independence sort of, groups, podcasts, everything else, it really lit a light to say, here's the safe withdrawal rate, right? I mean, so I think a lot of people start with that and you start to try to figure out what do you need to live on a year. And then you just, you punch in the numbers to see what you need. I mean, we would have, we'd be comfortable with, 2.5, something like that. But we know we can probably dial that back a little bit and still live comfortably. So it really is going to depend. This year was a bump in the road with COVID and with job change and everything else. We don't know how much that's really going to set us back yet. But I think we work towards a definitive amount based on how much we would need to live on a year. And then we rolled in selling the house and assuming we'd have couple hundred grand out of that cash to live on basically, and then kind of work from there.
Yeah. How do you figure that out? I mean, you know how much you spend now and, annually in household spending, but sometimes I think it's hard, right? Like to sit there and think, okay, what am I going to spend in retirement? How much am I really going to travel if that's of interest, right? How much am I really going to go visit kids if that's something, if kids live out of state or grandkids, right? I mean, how do you figure out, how are you go about figuring out how much you think you'll spend in retirement?
Well, I mean, we tracked, the last several years of what we spend on the house, on utilities, on entertainment, on food. And we tried to extrapolate that out as far as just two of us doing that, going forward. And then you figure in, a vacation or two a year, a little bit of travel, some of that stuff. So you just, you're starting with a baseline of what you spend now. You take out maybe a mortgage or you take out, what you're putting away for investment if you're going to not invest as much. And then you add in a couple of trips, you add in some fudge for, are we going to have to help the kids here or there? Stuff like that. So it's really just a swag, right? I mean, you're sort of looking at it all. You want to pad it. You don't want to over pad it, but you definitely don't want to be left short. Nobody wants to go back to work at 70. I don't anyway. So that's kind of how we came up with that number. It's in flux, I think, like anything. And, you've got to figure in, obviously, what is inflation going to do? And, what are taxes going to be? Like we were talking earlier, you don't know what taxes are going to be in 15 years. And you don't know what the market's going to be in 15 years. So it's just a swag, really.
So what is your annual household spending annually?
I should have known you were going to ask that.
Give or take.
Probably, beyond the mortgage, I mean, I think we're probably at 24.
Oh, wow.
22, 24.
Oh,
Like I said, that's a swag. That's on everything for kids, fees, travel, everything but the mortgage.
couple thousand.
That may be way off. Like I said, that's my wife's department. So,
okay. So looking back on your journey here on, is there something that you can pinpoint and say, hey, that's what made me a millionaire? Was it hard work? Was it managing your career? Was it being afraid to not be able to provide? Are there a couple things that really motivated you along the way?
Well, yeah, I think, once the kids came and we saw that we were just constantly in debt, constantly paying off credit cards that were 15% interest or something. And the light really clicked that, why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. Our income is good. We were at about 230K in income, for a while. And it just seemed silly that we were still borrowing money or running up credit card debt or doing some of that. So the light kind of clicked that, we should be putting this money away. We can still live a pretty high cost of living. We can still do some of the things we want to do. It's not really going to have a huge impact on our life. We're not the people who were, going to eat beans and rice forever, just hoping that, we would have a big nest egg at 70. But we decided to be kind of pragmatic and just say, we're going to put this much money away to get to this much money by 60. Right. And so it was pretty cut and dry. We don't want to spend money on credit card or, pay interest on debt. We want to just kind of know what we're spending. We eat out a couple times a week. Obviously COVID has changed, I think the math for everybody. You just want to get sick of cooking the same chicken 3 times a week. So probably eating out a little more than we did, but we're saving on gas and parking and some of the other stuff. But yeah, the big trigger, I think, was once we understood we had too much debt. We were doing stupid stuff like borrowing against a 401k, or not funding that, not even getting the match. I think it all, you felt really stupid when it all came together and it was like, hey, your company's going to match 100% of what you put in. It's pre-tax. It really won't even impact your paycheck, every 2 weeks that much. And you're putting this away. And it just really started to accelerate when we did that. And we saw those investments really start to grow pretty quickly.
So, to that line, right? If you listen to Dave Ramsey, he calls it all normal, right? He's like, that's normal, right? Whenever somebody comes
exactly,
in. Yeah. You obviously felt it was. Do people know about your wealth, or were your friends, family, people in the neighborhood living the same way, you think?
Well, like I said, we're in a pretty high cost of living area, north of Atlanta, very affluent suburb. Every house that gets built around here is 1.6, 1.7 million, kind of on average. And so there's a lot of people with nice cars, probably high income, but we don't really, sit and discuss, hey, are you in debt up to your ears? Are you financing your lifestyle with a buttload of cash? We've got a couple neighbors who I know are extremely frugal, and, literally one of my neighbors, I think, is probably the definition of the millionaire next door. I think they have high income. They don't spend money on much of anything. I think they're just putting it away. And then we've got some other neighbors in the neighborhood that, a new Mercedes every couple of years, big vacations, that sort of stuff. If I had to compare the two, I would say the one driving the older Toyota, not going on flashy vacations and stuff like that is probably the smarter guy. That's more on, that family's probably more on track to actually be set for retirement than the other.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting thing. So you live in that area, you don't discuss it, but do you think that just in general, being in that kind of environment pushes you to have some of that lifestyle creep? Maybe not you personally, but just in general? Or have you seen that, or did you see that in your own household too?
Yeah, absolutely. We see it. We feel it. I think when the kids come, especially as they get into, where our kids are now, they're 16, they're in high school. My son he could care less about anything materialistic, or he's not really influenced by that stuff. My daughter, a little more, everything from fashion to whatever, but their friends are all, most of her friends have money. Their families have money. So you feel that pressure to have the cool shoes and to have the car and to have that stuff. And your friends join the little local country club, which we did some years ago. And you just figure, well, that's $300-400 a month. That's worth it because we're doing whatever. You really start to feel that pressure. And it's hard to tell your kids not to feel it when you're doing it yourself. You're falling into the same thing. And your friends say, hey, why don't we go spend spring break at Universal Studios and Disney? And you just feel like, yeah, sure. Okay, that makes sense. But then you look back and it's like, was that really $3,000 well spent? So yeah, I think that lifestyle creep and that, that pressure to sort of keep up with the Joneses, it's a big part of it. And it's still, even now, even knowing the psychology and the sort of trap you get in, you still fall into it. You still feel that pressure, or I do. So, and that's a constant sort of, I don't want to say friction or stress, but I mean, I do think about it and I am conscious of it that, we have to be careful not to get caught up in it.
Yeah, totally. Do you regret being in that area or moving to that area? Would you do it differently if you rewind 15, 20 years?
So that's a good question. I think if we had stayed where we were or moved into an area, we actually looked at houses in a few different areas. And there were a couple places we thought, well, the kids would be in private school if we're here. So a big part of it, we believed in public schooling. And so we moved to an area with, one of the best high schools or the best school systems in the state. You pay a little more for it. I never did the math to figure if it would have been cheaper to buy a less expensive house or a less expensive cost of living area and paid for private school, or, we just figured what we're paying here to stay in this high cost of living area or, higher net worth area, whatever you want to call it. Is it worth it for the school we have? And we don't regret it. We've made great friends. There's a lot of great people here. The schools are great. We've been able to be really involved, in school and local organizations. So I don't regret it. But, we do have to be aware. And if I'd have known back then, I think I would have been a little more aware of the pressure. And that's something Dave Ramsey talks a lot about. You don't have to live like your neighbors. You don't have to front. The people who look like millionaires probably aren't. The people driving the old Toyota Corolla probably are. And I do think there is some truth to that, especially when you get into an area where we live.
Yeah. Is there anything looking back just with experiences or things that you wish you would have spent more money on that maybe you didn't? Other
than investing, no, I think we would have gotten more out of things we did spend money on, like vacations. I think, instead of a couple trips to Disney and Universal, I think we would have done a little more travel that was interesting. And I don't want to say educational, but at least, our trip to we took a trip to New York a few years ago and we actually rented a walk up in a neighborhood. We just wanted the kids to see kind of what that would be like if you were actually living in an apartment in New York. And we did the same thing. We took a week and went to Washington, D.C. We rented, we went on VRBO and we rented an apartment on Capitol Hill. And so I think it was a much more immersive experience to spend the money, see those sites and do that stuff than it was say, oh, let's go to Disney and get caught in that trap. And we enjoyed Disney and Universal. But for that same money, I think we got a lot more out of traveling sort of as a local in these areas. And so now we enjoy visiting national parks, going on hikes, being outside. So I think, shifting to that and really understanding what the kids wanted to do and letting them see the value in that. I think now when we spend our money and stuff like that, we're a little smarter about it. I don't regret going to Disney or doing Universal, but I think we would have I think we would have probably gotten as much out of, hey, let's go see LA and Seattle and Chicago.
Right. So now looking back and where you're at, 1.35, 1.5, or around there, has getting to that point and getting rid of this debt, has it affected your happiness levels or your confidence levels? And is there a point where you reached financially where that kind of stagnated or capped out?
I will say I'm pretty much a pessimistic person. It's not a great worldview, but it is what it is. So this year, obviously, I left my job last August. So I'm about a year since I've worked for much income. But having that money, and I think it had, when I logged on a few weeks ago just to look at our net worth, I think it really did help settle me. I was feeling very anxious and very stressed about what the next year was going to look like, with employment challenges right now, with COVID, with everything else. Everything's in such flux. I think it was really settling for me to look at and just see. I mean, that net worth is, having, almost $1 million in investments, it feels surreal in a way, right? Because it feels like it's not real money. It's sitting there waiting on something else.
Right.
But, we have a chunk in savings that we can live off of. and we have options, but having those options and being able to say, you know what, the year I've spent away from work has been rewarding. And it's been a luxury really to do it. I don't feel like I got to run down to Home Depot and stock shelves just to keep some income going. So in that front, yeah, it's been very settling to know that that's there. And then to look at your net worth, it makes you, it definitely makes you feel a little more settled. We may have hit a bump in the road this year. Our investing has slowed a little bit, because we needed the income. My wife took a big pay cut, because her organization was in flux. They got rid of over half their workforce. She was lucky that her job was saved. But with all of that change, the fact that we do have some cushion, it's definitely helpful. I mean, I couldn't imagine if we were where we are now, if COVID had hit and we really didn't have a lot in the bank and we couldn't cover the mortgage for a couple of years with just what we have saved. Yeah, I would feel I'd be in full blown panic, I think. So
let's just wrap up here, Ron, with some rapid fire questions. What's been the most expensive car you've ever purchased?
A few years ago, I bought a brand new Jeep Wrangler. I liked having a convertible. So, and the kids, I'd ridden motorcycles for years and to sort of share that convertible experience with the family. So I bought a $45,000 Jeep Wrangler.
Okay. What about most expensive shoes?
I spend money on shoes. Well, I spend decent on shoes. I love Allen Edmonds shoes because they last forever. So I would say probably $250 on a pair of Allen Edmonds boots that I wear every day.
Okay. A most expensive meal out that you've personally paid for?
Vegas, on an anniversary trip. We probably spent about $500 for me and the wife.
Okay. What items or experiences are worth spending more money on to you, and what's not worth the money?
Material wise, there's not a lot that I just think I've got to spend money on. I think we have really figured out that our happiness or our satisfaction comes from experiences more than buying stuff. So we, small little bits of travel when we can, run up and rent a cabin for a couple days and just have family time. I think that's where we like to spend our money.
How old were you when you became a millionaire?
Oh, probably late 40s. I would say 48, 47, 40. Well, probably not. Well, probably 48, 49. I wasn't really tracking it every day, so I can't really tell you when that actually tipped over.
Any books or news outlets or websites that have been influential to you? I know you mentioned Dave Ramsey.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Ramsey helped us kind of get set. We liked him for the really basic stuff. Past that, we didn't feel like we got as much out of him. As we got into, I found Mr. Money Mustache like a lot of people, and really the whole FIRE movement. We felt like we were a little old for the FIRE movement. I mean, we can still do it, obviously, but I think that's really, I mean, for my sake, I mean, if I had found that when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, it'd be a whole other world, right? Yeah, and so I would think if people are, if you're under 40 or you're under 35, I think tag on to that. So books like Millionaire Next Door, Your Money or Your Life, Simple Path to Wealth, some of the books that you'll see a lot of this FI community tout, they tout those books, I think, for a good reason. Sure. I think if nothing else, they might just be a little inspirational kick in the pants to just say, God, I'm being stupid. Why am I spending all this money on garbage I don't need?
Yeah. So as much as you're comfortable sharing here, what's been your range of household income through your working life?
For us, for early on, we were both probably, I would say in the late 90s, or when we bought this house in 2001, we were probably both making around 80. And that got up to, around the $230,000 income, both of us making about 115, 120, something in that area. This year it dropped down to just about 85.
Yeah. So just last question here. As you look back, what does it mean to be happy and fulfilled? You mentioned time with family, and has money brought that along the way? We talked about that a little bit, but just what does it mean to be happy and fulfilled, and any last words of advice here?
I think coming to grips with the fact that stuff doesn't equal happiness. Buying an expensive car, that was kind of fun. It was sort of a interesting dalliance, but we figured out after a couple of years, this thing's so expensive. It's just dumb. We can do a lot of this stuff in other ways. We can find ways that we're connected together. So, and this year during COVID, obviously, we probably had enough family for the rest of our lives, all trapped in this house. But I think just finding ways to experience, spending time together. It took us a little while to find our groove, and we figured out, hiking in the woods or walking around a city was really what was a great shared experience for our family. And that's what we like to do. We don't have to necessarily be entertained all the time with something manufactured. We can kind of find our own way. So that's where we are. We just like to do simple things that really bring us together.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Ron. Thanks again for coming on. Net worth of 1.35, maybe a little bit more than that, right, with this house. So thanks again for sharing your story. Congrats on your success. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks a ton. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.